Welcome back. So we have a very special guest with us. His name is John Lee. Thank you so much for coming with us, John Lee.
Thanks for having me, Laura. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, so I really want to get into like why you started an app and
Mm.
like more of like your background in that like how is do you feel like there's like a morality component to it, like helping people
Mm.
or like where do you like what are your reasonings behind it?
Yeah, no moral aspect to it. I wanted to start my own company a couple of years ago. It was entrepreneurship just has been something on my mind for the past decade. So I jumped in like 3 years ago and took the risk and tried to build my own app. And I love podcasts, so I tried to make my own podcast app. And that didn't work out in the end, but I pivoted that business and that product this time last year. So it's been about a year. I pivoted that product and business into an agency. And now I have a one-man agency where I create podcasts for, I create apps for podcasters. So if you wanted an app for your show, we can do that for you, and we can have that app in the app stores so your listeners can download your own app and they can engage with the show and other content and ultimately convert to becoming a customer. So that's our value proposition. If you're a content creator, um, you probably want your listeners to come to your website, come to your app, and then become a customer or a financial supporter. That's the benefit of having your own app. And we make that accessible for everyone.
That's incredible. So where do you see technology as far as like where it's going? Like are you glad that like the internet has really taken off and like social media? Just like what are your thoughts on technology in general?
I think technology is like anything else. It's like science. It can be used for good and it can be used for evil, and it'll be used for both going forward. So I think people have to be responsible in the way they consume and use technology, just like they have to be responsible for the way they consume content. Um, so for me, I'm not actually an early adopter. Like I don't use things just because they come up, and I'm actually quite careful about how I use technology, like social media. Um, yeah, I think people have to be careful because it can consume your life, it can consume your mental health, and we all have a responsibility to ourselves to be eating right, but also consuming the right um, content and technology that's going to help us grow and develop as the human beings we want to be. So that's my perspective. I think it's neutral and people can use it for good or for bad, just like anything else, alcohol as an example.
Yeah, definitely. So it's like kind of going back, look at the premise of this show is about like being balanced. And so like using it, but maybe not letting it like take over your life and just like you were saying, like anything else, like alcohol or anything else.
Food,
So
yeah.
definitely agree. Um, do you think that internet should be a fundamental right though? Like does everyone have should have the opportunity to have that balance, to create that balance for themselves?
I think so. Yeah, I think the internet is it's a revolution. So it's the way that people access information and the truth. So I've been reading articles recently about the way Russia is trying to make their own internet inside the country, and the way China has already created like their own. They call it like the Great Firewall of China, right? So they've got their own version of the internet inside the country, and I think that's dangerous. I think people have the right to participate um, in the internet, which is a global thing. It's not owned by anybody, and it's where um, the truth is. A lot of disinformation also, but it's a democratic place where people have access to discover the truth, right? So I do think it's a fundamental right, and I think everyone should have access to the internet, and we're all going to have to learn how to use it wisely.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that everyone deserves to use that truth. I like that you use that word, truth, because everyone sees truth in a different way. So I wanted to know like how you define truth.
I think truth is just I've heard of a term called the correspondence theory. So truth is just an accurate representation of the way things are. So that I think is the truth. Um, and the reason I like the internet is like the reason I like democracy. It's that no one person, no one entity is in control, because um, I don't think any one person or one entity is is good enough to be in control. So there was a phrase that I heard earlier, like this person believes in democracy not because he believes in like the inherent good of every individual, but he doesn't believe that any individual is good enough to be in control. So keeping it an open ecosystem is just the safest way for us to preserve the truth, and not having any one entity or person having control over it.
Yeah, I love that. That's like, I think it's cool how when something like is absolutely true, then everyone can agree with it. Because I what I was thinking about was like with perception, because if you like, I don't know if you've seen that meme where it's like one person's like pointing and it says it's a 6, the other person's like it's a 9, and they're both right, but they're in their own perspective. And
Yeah.
so that's like how I've been like trying to grapple with what truth really means,
Mm.
because the way that we were brought up, or the way that just that like the content we consume, like we were talking about, changes our perspective. So that's why I was like wondering, like, would it change our truth? So I really like the way that you defined that.
Yeah, that's fair. I do think we can look at the same data and come to different conclusions. That kind of leads me to a thought I've had before. I don't think data speaks for itself. I don't think observations, I don't think scientific observations um, speak for themselves. They don't point to a particular conclusion. All those conclusions are interpretations. People have to interpret the data, and data can be interpreted in many different ways. So people who say like, I'll follow the data wherever they go, I think they're misunderstanding what data provides. Um, so I don't know if you followed that, but that's my particular position at this point. I don't think observations speak for themselves. I think all observations must be interpreted, and people do that interpretation.
Yeah, definitely. Like with looking at, like you said, like looking at data, the way that I feel like data can also be used in different ways. Like if you go in with data, like if you go in with like a hypothesis, let's say, and you want to like prove yourself right, you're gonna find that
Mhm.
in whatever data set that you collect. So
Yes.
that's why um like as a PhD student, like we talk about like how to combat that and how to make it like
Mhm.
more subjective instead of objective. Did I say that part right?
Mhm.
But like the one that's like, yeah,
Yeah, more
so
objective. I personally don't think pure objectivity is possible. We're all subjects, and therefore, it's kind of by definition impossible to come to a purely objective perspective or conclusion. We're the ones making that interpretation, and so uh, we have to. I mean, I think a wise person uh, acknowledges that I come to the table with a worldview as a person with my own experiences and maybe unconscious biases and assumptions. So being aware that I am not a purely objective observer or interpreter or anything is important. Um, yeah.
yeah, definitely. Thank you for bringing that up, because you are absolutely right. And so that was like one of the things I was going to mention too. Like in those classes that we learned that we always have to put like at least a paragraph, like letting the reader know of our background, so that they know like the lens that we're viewing this in, because you're absolutely right. And so like what I wanted to do is like think about like data as in like how we see our lives. And so like it goes back like with like affirmations and things, like when you tell yourself something over and over again, you're gonna see the data is gonna be there, and then vice versa too. Like I don't know if you've heard of this like study where if you like look up is coffee good for me, you'll have like a bunch of articles saying that
Mm.
coffee is, but then if you look up is coffee bad for me, you'll find a bunch of articles that say it is. So
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. I haven't seen that study, but yeah.
Yeah, but isn't that so interesting that literally whatever, like you were saying earlier, like whatever we're subjects, so whatever we want to see in the data, it's going to be there.
Yes. Yeah. We're all what is it called? selection bias. Like we're all filtering the data in some way,
Definitely.
and you're always going to be able to find data to support your model or your preferred interpretation if you want it, if you want to.
Yeah. And so now moving it more towards, so we talk about technology, but now like the next level up is artificial intelligence. So what are your thoughts of AI?
Personally, I don't think AI will ever become conscious because fundamentally, I think consciousness, the way that I experience it, involves free will. And uh, I don't think there's room for free will in the laws of nature. So the laws of physics and nature are deterministic. And my experience of free will is that I am making genuine choices. I'm making real decisions and decisions that are not determined by physics, right? So there's a disjunct for me between the laws of physics and the way free will works as I experience it. So if I define consciousness as including free will, I don't see how a machine, which is made up of parts, right, mechanics, could ever become truly free. And so for me, I don't think AI is ever going to become conscious or become like us. And so I personally believe that, for the reasons I gave, if I am genuinely free, there's got to be something about me that doesn't reduce down to physics. So there must be a soul, some immaterial aspect of me that's enabling me to make these free decisions that I'm morally responsible for. One cool definition of, I think, consciousness I've heard recently is we are the only beings that we know of that can make promises and keep promises. So can a machine make a promise and keep a promise? I don't think so. And I don't think they'll ever be able to make a promise and keep a promise. Whereas I, as a human being, I can make a promise. And regardless of how I feel or any state of my molecules, the state of the matter that composes me, I can keep my promise. So that may be another way to look at, I think, free will.
Yeah, that is such a cool definition of how to think about consciousness. I never really thought about it that way. So that actually brings me to like morality. So now that we have the ability to keep a promise, but are we obligated as humans to keep that promise?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
I believe so. I mean, because of my worldview, I'm a Christian, and within my worldview, I believe there are objective moral values and obligations. So moral values and obligations that exist outside of myself, that are imposed on us, me individually, but also on the human race from the outside. In my worldview, that would be God imposes these moral values and obligations on us. So if we keep them, then there's moral credit. And if we break them, then there are moral consequences to breaking these obligations. That's my particular view.
So are you talking about like the 10 Commandments, or are there others outside of that?
I think they boil down, Jesus said, those can boil down to love God and love your neighbor. So basically love one another, I think, is the ultimate moral obligation.
So there are like a bunch of different types of love. So could you describe how you define love?
I guess treating others the way you want to be treated, the golden rule, maybe is the simplest definition of love.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So now I want to pivot over to meaning. So do you think that there is a meaning of life?
I do. Again, because of my worldview, it just falls out of the worldview, right? So because I believe in a God who loves me, I do think love and purpose are tied together. So I'll get back to the meaning kind of in a roundabout way. The picture I get in my head is I love my son, and that means I want good things for him, obviously, but it also means I want him to become a certain kind of person. So there's a purpose embedded in my love for my son, like a directionality. So when I think of the fact that God loves me, I think, oh, therefore he must have a purpose for me as well. And because he has a purpose for me, now everything that I experience, everything I do, think, say, everything, my life becomes meaningful because there is a purpose. And the analogy I have in my head around the connection between purpose and meaning is like in every story, if it's a good story, you have a hero, and that hero is on an adventure and there's a purpose to that adventure. Maybe the hero is going to the mountain to slay the dragon and get the gold, right? And bring that gold back to the village and also be transformed in that entire experience. So there's a purpose. Go to the mountain, get the gold. And everything that hero experiences on that journey becomes meaningful, whether it's suffering or good fortune. All these events are meaningful toward the purpose. If you remove the purpose, then the meaning of all these events fall away and they all become just random events without meaning because there is no purpose. So that's why I think you need an objective purpose in order for the events of our lives to be meaningful. I think every one of us have very profound and very deep experiences of meaning in our lives. They can happen every day, but I think the most powerful ones are things like when you have a child, that people say that's super meaningful. When you fall in love, that can also feel very, very meaningful. And then when people pass away, who you love, when your loved ones pass away, that experience can also feel very meaningful in the moment. I think for those experiences of meaning to, I guess, to be real, well, for me to take those experiences of meaning seriously, I find the idea that there is a purpose for my life helps me take those experiences very like seriously. I don't know if that made sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. If there is no purpose to my life, then those experiences of meaning, I think, just become an illusion, right? They become like, okay, I'm experiencing something, but it's just a feeling. It's not a fact that this experience is meaningful. It's just an emotion. It's just a feeling that I'm experiencing. It's some brain chemistry that's going on that may be evolutionarily programmed into me, but it doesn't mean that the experience itself is objectively meaningful. It's actually meaningful. It would just be like a fiction, a useful fiction even, but still an illusion in the end.
Okay. So when you're talking about like this illusion or versus reality, I'm thinking of like Plato's allegory of the cave. So what are your thoughts about that?
It's been a while since I read that book. Can you remind me
Oh, sorry.
what part
Yeah.
of it you're pointing to?
So yeah, so it's these people that are stuck in a cave and they see these like shadows on the wall and they're like all super big and scary. And then so that's why they like stay in the cave and they don't want to come out. But eventually one of them it gets like brave enough to go out, and turns out it was like these like tiny little like creatures, and there was just a candlelight, and that's what was making them to be so much bigger than they were. So so it's like their illusion, like the fear that they had from this illusion impacted their reality.
Yep. Okay. So you're kind of pointing to the fact that those shadows were illusions and that their lives were governed by an illusion. They were restrained because of those illusions.
Yeah. So like my point is like looking at purpose. Like if there was no purpose, then I feel like the world would be a scary place. But even with purpose, it is scary. So how do you view that of like still trying, like you're saying, climb up the mountain with these illusions that may or may not be there?
Yeah. I think they're both, like you said, believing in a purpose is difficult, and then not believing in a purpose is also, I think, maybe even more difficult. If you don't believe in purpose, I think that people can tend to fall into nihilism. There is no purpose in life, in my life. why do anything? Like, why pursue anything? It's all meaningless. So there's a danger there. People can fall into depression and hopelessness and can just stop living if you feel like nothing matters. I think we're all biologically wired um, to need purpose and to need to feel like our lives matter. So I think there's something fundamental to ourselves that we need that to live. Um, so yeah, it can be dangerous if you lose that sense of purpose and meaning. And I think a lot of maybe the mental health problems that we experience in the West is because our physical needs are met for the most part. In America and in the West, people live relatively wealthy compared to most of human history. Many of us are not hungry, not trying to get water and food and shelter. And so when our basic needs are met, um, now we have to kind of pay attention to, well, then what is the purpose of my life, right? Beyond getting the basic needs of life. And so people get stuck. I think in the past, we did have traditions and religion to point or to give us purpose. And that's some of the benefit of having a religion, is that purpose is imposed on you. It's given to you. You just have to accept it. Or society has purposes that it imposes on you, depending on where you're from. But in the West, we're so individualistic. We're now bound by as many social like impositions or requirements or obligations that a lot of people, I think, feel lost and kind of floating, and that may be the cause of a lot of the anxiety and depression that we see in our modern day. It's my theory.
Yeah, that's a very interesting take on it. You talked about that purpose was like imposed by religion.
Mm.
So I have two questions. So we'll ask the first. I'll tell you both actually. I'll tell you the both right now, and then we'll go. So the first one is like, what's the difference between God and religion? Because earlier you said that God was the one who imposed
Mm-hmm.
like the obligations.
Mm-hmm.
So just like the differences there. And then my other question was like, what is that purpose that
Yeah.
that religion imposes, in your opinion?
Yeah. I mean, when I spoke of God, I just meant, I mean, in my particular religion, because I'm a Christian, I believe in a particular God as Father, and there are all these attributes of the Christian God. But for a Hindu, that would be a different idea, right? They have their own gods. That's a pluralistic religion. And then when I say religion, I just mean like all the different religions out there: Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, whatever your particular religion is. And I think each religion provides its own worldview and its own definition of what human beings are here for. So I guess maybe as an example, so in the West, like the Western modern worldview is, maybe your purpose is to follow your passion. Maybe that's like the cultural message that we've grown up hearing, right? You can be whatever you want to be. Your purpose is to find your passion, pursue your passion, whatever that is, discover it for yourself and create it for yourself. And that's very difficult for people in the West, like I said, and I think that's why a lot of us are falling into mental health issues. But in another culture, like maybe in a traditional Muslim community, or in that society, maybe as a man, your purpose is to be a good father, provide for your family, um, obey the laws of Islam. So these purposes are kind of given to me as a member of that society, and they're fairly clear. So if I break one of those laws, then there is shame. I feel shame, and I am shamed by my society and community. So there are these like enforcing influences on my behavior and how I think and live. I think the purpose given to myself and people within the Christian worldview is love God and love your neighbor. So that's the purpose of my life. It's to love God, to know his love for me, and then to love my neighbor as myself. So pretty simple, but as we all know, impossible to keep perfectly. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Okay, great. So like diving deeper into God, how do you view God? Because like God in the Christian faith is about like is him being like omniscient, omnipotent, like every like knowing everything, being everywhere. So do
Yeah,
you believe that God is inside of all of us too?
I do, in a sense. Yeah, I do believe in that kind of a God who's all powerful, all good, all knowing, uh, everywhere, present everywhere. And I do believe Christians. So God, we also believe in a Trinity. Um, so I don't know how familiar you are with Christian doctrine, but the idea there is we believe in one God, but somehow that one God is also represented in three persons. So there is a triunity or trinity there, a unity um, within diversity. And I believe the Holy Spirit, that third person of the Trinity, indwells His people. So I do believe that there is God is inside of me and helps me every day. Yeah.
Yeah. So like when you talk about like a relationship with God, do you mean it like specifically with God or like through the church to God, or how do you view like relationship? Do you have a relationship with the three of the Trinity? Just like your views with your relationship.
Yeah. Personally, I think my relationship with God is not mediated primarily through third parties, like through the church. I personally am not going to a church at the moment. It's something that I need to revisit and consider in the future. But so my relationship is personal and I believe direct with God. And it is a little bit confusing, like how do I relate to a tri-personal God? But I think traditionally there are ways to communicate and relate to the different persons of the one God. So yeah, I try to maybe stick with that as best I can, but I don't think there are particular rules to that.
Okay, great. So my next question, oh, it was about how we were talking about earlier with purpose and everything. So kind of bringing that back around. I wanted to know your thoughts on coincidences. So is
Mm.
it like everything happens for a reason? Is that along with the purpose? How do you view that?
Yeah, so that again, because I believe what I believe, I don't believe in like pure coincidences. If you would define coincidence as like a random act or something that it just arises from chance, I do believe that um, because God is the creator and He is the sustainer of all reality, that there are no pure coincidences in that random sense. I do believe that God is in the um, in like the language of doctrine, like He is sovereign, which means He is over and in control of every event.
Okay, yeah. Okay, cool. And so did you learn all of these, like you keep talking about like your worldview, is that through so you said you're not going to a church, so like did you learn that from just like by reading the Bible, or is it by like inner knowing when you're like I don't know how your relationship with God is, but like however
Mm.
you communicate, or how do you come up with these thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in the church, so I probably got a lot of that just by attending church as a child and growing up in that tradition. But really, in my 20s is probably when I started taking my faith seriously. And even though I haven't really gone to church religiously or consistently for a lot of my adult life, I've still read the Bible and listened to content, a lot of content through sermons and different teachers. And I probably get a lot of my education that way and my thoughts from those channels.
That's great. So I love how you put like an active, you're like very active in your relationship. So it's just like any other kind of relationship where you have to put in the work to like reap the rewards or whatever. Um, so yeah,
Mhm.
that's great. I also wanted to ask, just like where your thoughts are with science versus religion.
Mhm. I don't think there's any conflict between science and religion. And I
Thank
know,
you. Yeah, I agree.
well, I keep going back to my worldview, and we talked about how everyone has a worldview, right? In the beginning, how none of us are purely objective, floating brains. Like we all come with this set of glasses that we see the world through. And so, because of my worldview, the whole God is creator of everything. How could there be a conflict between the findings of science and the beliefs of my particular religion? So I don't think fundamentally, for me, there can't be a conflict. So all truth that is discovered scientifically is God's truth, and yeah, there ought not be any uh, inconsistencies there.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's kind of like when that's why they call it a discovery, because God had already put it there and now it's just like up to us to like find it, to find
Mhm.
out more about it. So yeah, definitely agree. I also wanted to ask about thoughts. So like when we have like our imagination
Mm.
is like where's the separation between what God is and then what we are, like when it comes to like these minds, because like you said, like God is the creator of everything. So does God put these ideas into my head, or even the words I'm speaking, like
Mm.
is it, where's the line where it comes from me and God?
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question, but I
Hard,
think
yeah.
it's a really cool question, and something I've thought a little bit about. And I don't think any of us know where our thoughts come from, honestly. Like when we think about the ideas we get, uh, I don't think anyone, and even like our interests, we don't choose our interests. They choose us in some magical way. Um, and so my current theory on like where our thoughts come from and where maybe our intuitions might come from is our subconscious. And I think our bodies are all of our five senses. We're constantly inputting data. Like we're just like the most sophisticated data collection machines there are, and we're constantly gathering data from our environment through this conversation, through my eyes, my ears, my nose. That's all coming in, whether I am aware of it or not. And the brain is processing that information. And sometimes some of that bubbles up into our dreams. And I think some of that bubbles up into our intuitions and thoughts. And so um, I tend to trust my intuitions because more so now because of the way I'm thinking about what intuitions are, especially around people. I think our intuitions are the kind of the end product of a lot of processing, data processing that the brain is doing with all these inputs that it's bringing in. And so if I have an intuition about a certain person, that's because my brain has processed a lot of information that I'm not aware of that's come in. And so I tend to trust my intuition. I think there's good reason to follow them and see if they take them seriously, at least, and not dismiss them.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of going along those lines, is human potential capable of anything and everything, do you think?
I don't think so. Not everything, not anything. We're limited human beings. We have particular limitations. Um, did you have a particular like capability in mind when you say like anything and everything?
Well, I meant it more of like in this physical world. I didn't really mean it like in the spirit world, or like, was obviously God is a creator and can make everything, and obviously like we can't
Mhm.
create in the same way as God can, but I do believe that we can create like with our energy, like the way, like wherever I put, like we were talking about before the show, when I'm going to put my energy on the podcast instead of my
Mhm.
dissertation. So like, I feel like wherever you put your energy, you are creating
Mhm.
something. So I wanted to like pick your brain about like where are the lines of like how far humans are capable of going, like with our energy, or our beliefs, or like our purpose, like you were saying, like climbing up the mountain and to get the gold. So like what can and can't the gold be is my question.
Uh, what can or can't the goal of our lives be? Like, um,
So for
hmm,
instance, like we were talking about like the father in Islam, like his purpose is to be a good father, be a
hmm.
provider. So does that mean that he can't pursue his passions like you're talking about for people in the West? Or like how like where's the line? So I'm trying to
I see.
figure out.
I feel like people can pursue whatever they want to pursue, right? It's just there are going to be consequences to what you pursue. Like if you make your life and your life's purpose about one thing, then yeah. So let's say, for example, if I made the purpose of my life to be the CEO of a particular company, right? That's the purpose of my life. Then I'm going to have to work really, really hard. I may not have as much time with my friends and family because my ultimate purpose is to become CEO. And so there will be consequences relationally and personally as I pursue that particular purpose. I think that's true for anything. If I pursue being a good father and I prioritize that, then I may not be able to become CEO because we're all limited in time and resources. And so our priorities matter. I think what we pursue matters, and there are always going to be there's going to be a trade-off in whatever you pursue.
Okay, great. So we're talking about free will, and so that the when you were talking right now, I'm like, yeah, it's like a little like free will. Like we get to decide like where we put our energy or our purpose. Or so earlier we were talking about like purpose being imposed. So like, is it imposed or is it free will? And I'm not trying to be like, oh, you're wrong, you're contradicting yourself or anything like that. I'm just like trying to like dig deeper.
Oh yeah, well, I think when I say imposed, I mean it's like given. We're still free to choose to
Ah,
obey or not. Like we can choose to go with it, or we can choose to rebel and do something else. Yeah, personally, I think maybe submitting to the purpose of God for me, the will of God, is going to be the best option. It will mean the happiest outcome for me, the most fulfilled life for myself. Um, and going my own way is in the end going to be self-destructive. So that's my perspective on it.
okay. So just to clarify, so for you, like I keep alluding to the mountain because that's what we first came up
Mhm.
with as a metaphor. But so just to like understand the purpose that God gave you was like up on that mountain. And so it's your choice to pursue, to walk up that mountain, to hike up that mountain, even though it might be hard, or to just sit at the bottom. Is that correct?
Yeah, yep. So in every story, there's going to be a hero and there's going to be a call to adventure. So the hero has a choice. You can either respond, accept the call, and go on the journey, or you can stay home. And then it wouldn't be a great story, right? If you didn't accept the call to adventure. So
Mhm.
yeah, I think there's free will in whether we accept or reject the call to adventure.
So you think that every single person can be a hero?
I think we're all heroes in our own story, and whether we think of ourselves as heroes or not, we are the main character in the story of our lives, right?
Yeah.
We don't think of our lives in any other way. We think of our lives as a story. I think we do that without even realizing we're doing that.
Definitely. Yeah, because like right now, like not right, well, it's been going on for a while, but like on social media, it's always like, oh, like main character energy. But I've always thought that like, but aren't we all the main character? Like in someone's story, I'm going to be the sidekick. In someone's story, I'm going to be the villain. And so in my story, I'm going to be the main character.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad that we agree on that.
Mhm.
So going back to, we keep going to meeting and then stepping away. So I'm just gonna bring us back. Um, so do you? Oh no, I was gonna ask, but I feel like you already kind of answered this. What is the meaning of a good life? But I feel like it could just be about like purpose. Is that what you would say?
What is the meaning of a good life?
Yeah.
That's interesting. What is the meaning? of a good life. Um, I might, if that means like, what is the value of a good life? Um, hmm, that's a really good question. I'm just trying to wrap my mind around the question itself. I think I'm going back to like, so what is this? What is the significance of a life lived well? What is the value of a life lived well? I think that value, um, in my perspective, is determined by the beholder. So like we say, when I think about like the price of something, right? The price of an object is determined by the buyer. If I go to the shop, um, yeah. So the value of something is determined by the person who wants it and is willing to pay for it. So the value of my life is not determined by myself. Like I don't determine the value of my life. The value of my life is determined by someone on the outside who is looking at me and who is willing to ascribe value to me. So again, like if the value of my life is to be objective, it has to be directed or imposed on me from the outside. And because God loves me, He values me, and therefore my life is valuable. Whether I feel like my life is valuable or not, in my worldview, I believe it is valuable because of the one on the outside who is loving me and yeah, therefore valuing me and how I live. Maybe that answers the question. I don't know.
Yeah. So when at first when you were like value of how others see me, and then I was like, do you mean like people? But then I feel like you clarified it that it's like God, how God views you, and so that's what creates that value. Yeah.
That's what creates, I think, the objective value of my life. If my life has an objective value, then it has to be determined by a third party. Yeah, and so that's where I think the value of every human being and the value of our lives derives from the love of God.
Yeah.
I think it's just riffing on the idea that a lot of people, including myself, often feel like our lives, we care too much about what people think of us, right? So when someone else thinks highly of us, we feel good. When someone thinks negatively of us, we feel bad. And so our experience of the value of my life, or I guess you might call it like self-esteem, goes up and down based on what we think other people are thinking of us. So, and that goes up and down because people think of us in different ways, right? But if you anchor the value or my self-esteem or self-confidence on something that's not so fickle, that doesn't go up and down depending on who I'm interacting with or who I'm thinking is thinking about me, and rather I anchor that on God, whose love for me is unconditional, it's constant, then there may be a chance there for my self-esteem to be more stable and resilient to ups and downs.
Yeah. Like I just had like a mini revelation, like when you were speaking about how if we put, like, I love how you said, like, put the value in how God views us and God loves us. And so we said earlier, like, God is also inside of us, like with the Holy Spirit. So in turn, it's kind of like self-love. Like if we love ourselves, and then that also like goes with the whole golden rule that we were talking about earlier. I feel like everything's like coming right around the golden rule earlier, that treat others as we treat ourselves. But if we don't think highly of ourselves, then we're not going to treat others well. So I think it all goes back to that self-love. And if we see our own value through how God views us, that God is within us, is with us, is here on the journey with us, then it all comes together. And that's when like free will come too, that it's still your choice if you want to go with God or be by yourself. But I feel like by choosing to be with God and to love yourself, then that is how we have meaning in our lives.
Yeah, I think you've got it exactly right. Yeah, I think a lot of us suffer or struggle with loving ourselves because we're looking for something within ourselves we're looking for something lovable within ourselves. We love yourself because you're beautiful, because you're strong, love yourself
Mm.
for these reasons, but those things are not constant. Whereas if I love myself because God loves me, then my self-love is not anchored in anything about myself, my attributes. It's anchored in someone else's love for me.
Mhm.
So I think it's more stable if we looking at it at that way.
Yeah, it's like anchored in like knowing that we're gonna be there for like, man, I lost it. Could you say that one more time?
Yeah. So I feel like uh, so I struggle, and I think a lot of people struggle with finding reasons to love ourselves. So if I love myself because I'm successful, oh, I got a new job, and and now I'm happy about myself. My self-esteem is high. It's easy to love myself. But if I lose my job or I do badly on a test or something, I feel bad about myself because my my self-esteem, i.e., my self-love, is dependent on my performance, on how I'm doing in life. And people do well and do poorly. We go up and down. Like life is changing all the time, and so our self-esteem goes up and down. Our self-love goes up and down based on our circumstances. But if my self-love and my self-esteem is anchored not in my performance, but in the fact that God loves me, or in kind of like a human level as well. Like if our self-esteem is anchored in the love my family has for me, then it's more stable because my physical father loves me and my physical mother also love me. And hopefully, um, everyone listening, like there are people in your life who love you unconditionally. If your self-esteem is anchored in their love for you, then it should be more stable than anchoring your self-esteem on your performance.
Yeah, and now I like it all. Thank you for explaining that further, because then it brought it back to me what I was going to say about by doing that, that is how like we can like not necessarily worry, but we can just enjoy being a human, and just knowing that as long as we're following God, that we're going to be okay as just being human. Like we don't have these like expectations from society that sometimes like bring us down. And like you were saying earlier, like that's like what causes like anxiety and depression and all of this. I feel like it's like you're feeling like the weight of the world on you. And so yeah, so I'm glad that we came up with that. Um,
Yeah, I feel like so that triggers something in my head, something I heard before. Like um, we're all being judged all the time. We're also always judging ourselves. We want, in the end, like when we stand before the judge of ourselves or the judge of others, to be found um, like significant or to be found worthy, um, to be judged like good, like you're good, you've lived a good life. We're looking for that judgment, and that causes a lot of stress. Like we're all striving to be successful, like define successful for yourself, and that's very stressful. And um, a lot of us never achieve our own definitions of success. um, so kind of what I default to is, and as a Christian, what I believe is, um, like the courtroom is adjourned, like the judgment has already happened for me, and God has found me um, righteous is like the term for it. He's already like good with me. He already loves me, and he's already accepted me, and I'm good. Like I don't need to achieve anything else. I'm already good. Like God and I are good. He loves me, and whether I do this or that in life doesn't matter because the courtroom is adjourned, and um, yeah, I'm good. So I don't have to be as stressed about achieving things in life.